Hey, what's going on? This is the Giants Report. I'm your host, Quis, joined as always by my co-host, JD. JD, man, how's everything with you?
Everything's good, man. I'm excited to talk Giants football. And what are we going to talk about today, Keith?
Well, we've got a pretty good show lined up. Right now, we're going to be focusing on the Giants and their moves as they try to get below the salary cap. Now, right now, as we speak, the Giants have already released Kevin Zeitler. They've released David Mayo. They've released Cody Core. And they've also released Golden Tate. And in the minutes since we've been recording, there's also been news that Nate Solder has they haven't agreed to terms, but it looks like they're heading in the right direction. So it seems like the Giants are making the proper moves to free up some cap space. What I want to talk about, or what we want to talk about in this video, is what should the Giants do with this cap space? Now, JD, what are your thoughts, and what do you think the Giants should try to do when they try to build out the remaining portion of this roster?
Well, I think part of it is yet to be. We're yet to see what's going to happen. Mostly because this Nate Solder news is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a big part of it in terms of how far is he going to take the pay cut. And so, it looks like he's agreed to sides have agreed for a return. So that's set in stone. And it looks like there is an agreement coming. We just don't know the details. And so once they settle that down, we'll see what their salary cap space looks like. They'll still have to do a few more moves because remember, you also need some cap for the draft class, and you have some re-signing to do with Leonard Williams, and potentially even if they fit in Dalvin Tomlinson as well, and then you got free agency. So I think part of it is kind of a wait and see situation. And once that happens, we can get into free agency and hopefully sign an impact player.
So you say once we get into free agency, we can sign an impact player, and it seems like right now there's two camps among Giants fans. There's go out and sign a elite wide receiver, a legit number one, to kind of help Daniel Jones as he's progressing into what is a very important year, year three. This is the year we're going to have to decide whether or not we're going to be picking up his fifth year option. So there's one camp that wants us to address and focus on the offense at wide receiver. Then you have another camp that says we've gone long enough without a legit premium edge rusher, and they think we should address that in this free agent class. What are your thoughts, and who do you think we should go after?
Me personally, I would like to go after Kenny Galladay. I would like to go after the wide receiver position. I understand that and listen, in the end, I don't think there's a right or wrong plan per se. I just think it depends on what the front office feels they should target in free agency as the veteran player, the position that they want a veteran in, and then go dynamic on draft during draft night. In other words, do you go with the veteran wide receiver and then go, anywhere in the draft? Or do you go edge free agency and go wide receiver in the draft? I don't because we still have a lot of needs. Let's be honest. We have needs at edge. We have needs at corner. We need an established player next to James Bradbury. Uh, we have offensive line questions to still answer. So this team is still in construction mode. Me personally, I would go Kenny Galladay. Um, he's a 6'4" receiver. He's an outstanding route runner. And specifically for Daniel Jones, you know, uh, I'm in favor of the size of the wide receiver. When we look at Eli Manning, he had Plaxico, who was 6'5". Amani Toomer was 6'3". You know, I understand that the NFL has changed and a lot of these dynamic receivers now are kind of on the smaller end. But I just think that we don't have Aaron Rodgers. We don't have Patrick Mahomes. We don't have these stout, accurate quarterbacks where they can play with any size wide receiver. And I think for Daniel Jones specifically, um, I would favor a bigger wide receiver, a big, strong wide receiver. I would favor size just to expand the catch radius for some of his throws. If you saw with Eli, how many times did Plaxico Burress bail Eli out on a bad throw? Sometimes when you have a 5'11", 5'10" receivers, you don't get those opportunities on TV. It just looks like a overthrown pass. But maybe if there was a 6'4" wide receiver, it's a catch. And so that's my, I would go wide receiver. And then in a draft, I mean, I can tell you now, or we can wait a little bit later.
Yeah.
What
So
about you, Keith?
in free agency, when it comes to the two camps, I would probably fall in the edge camp. Because be honest, Galladay is a good pick, and if we were to go wide receiver, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I just think when you look at the Giants and their cap situation, I think the fact that there are a lot more edge rushers that are available is going to help in that negotiation process. So you see, we can target a player like a Hassan Reddick, a player that Giants fans should know because he went out there and he had 5 sacks against us, and he really destroyed anything we were trying to get going. And some people would argue and say, yeah, he got most of those his sacks in that first game. But if you take in that game against us, but if you take away those 5 sacks, he would still end up as the second lead sack leader on our team, above Tomlinson and a little bit below Leonard Williams. So I think Hassan Riddick would be a good player that we can target, and it would allow us to still have some cap to, like you said, find a veteran cornerback to put opposite of James Bradbury and just to help our defense in that way. So not only would we be getting a edge rusher to kind of make things difficult for the quarterback, we could now bring in a cornerback as well to kind of pick off some of the mistakes that's going to cause. And you said that when it comes to the draft, you may want to target a edge or another player outside of what we have in those two camps. Who would you probably try to go after in the draft?
Well, real quick before I get to that, as you mentioned edge. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned wide receiver, and and unfortunately, it's two positions that you're gonna have to pay up. We're already dealing with that with Leonard Williams, where we're trying to, negotiate a long-term deal. So that's the that's the critical part of this team, as we are rebuilding ourselves into a very good team. Is, you know previous drafts and et cetera that have happened. Now we're in this position where the positions that are of need are positions that we're going to have to pay up, especially in free agency. So I would, although I would go after Kenny Galladay, I would totally understand if the Giants decide that, listen, he's gonna cost too much, because I think he's entering free agency as the top wide receiver in the class as well, which
Mm-hmm.
means money's gonna follow you being the number one player at a position. It's just the way free agency goes. So, it's who I would like, but I would totally understand if we go elsewhere because of financial purposes. Who
Yeah,
would
they're
I go
saying.
after?
Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
No, I was just saying they're saying he might get Amari Cooper money. You're talking 20 mil a year, which would be
Yeah.
a lot, especially with our
18,
cap situation.
18, 19, 20. But again, I mean, listen, man, I think the size element is key for me with Daniel Jones, just because of the Eli Manning experience and previous quarterbacks, and just also the space and real estate that a wide receiver of that height and of that route running ability and catch radius can give a quarterback. I think that's key, especially when you're playing top defenses and you're playing good corners, and those routes, and that the spacing gets tighter. You need those type of wide receivers, in my opinion. Um,
I would
and yeah,
counter that a little bit by saying, yes, I hear you with the catch radius, but when you look at the receivers that are in this draft, which kind of just brings us into the next part of or the next discussion would be draft. I think we can find a wide receiver and that's going to be cheaper, that's going to be on a rookie deal, that's going to be able to get us that separation. So the fact that he may not have as wide of a or as large of a catch radius, he's still going to be able to get that separation and allow Daniel Jones to find him either on deep balls. Because remember, in Daniel Jones's first season, he had a pretty good percentage when it came to his deep passes. And I thought that was just going to increase when you look at Jason Garrett's offense. So if we can get a Waddle to put out there opposite of Slayton and with Sterling Shepard in the slot, I think we'd be a much higher potent offense as opposed to going out and bringing in Galladay, who is going to potentially cost 20 some odd mil. So if I had to choose between the two, if I knew that Waddle would be available at 11 and Galladay was going to take 20 mil, I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Waddle, seeing that we have so many holes right now on the Giants and the way the pandemic is killing us in terms of the cap going down. I think Waddle would probably be the route I would go if I'm going to go and bring in an edge like a Hassan Reddick or even a Carl Lawson, which I made a video and I'll link that above.
Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't, if we go wide receiver in the draft, give me that player that can create separation and that's a good route runner. Route running is very important to me, especially when it's a smaller wide receiver, because as you mentioned, the advantage that a smaller wide receiver would have, um, when faced with top corners and top defenses, is that ability to create separation with speed. But if you have speed and you have no route running ability, you become another Sonoris Moss. You become another Tavon Austin, where you have these players that kill the combine, they kill the 40, but they don't have that route running ability. They don't have the savviness to create that separation to complement their speed. And some of them are combine speed and it doesn't translate to game speed. So when you look at the potential prospects that are available with Devonta Smith, who now a lot of mocks have him dropping to 11. So you may never know. And a lot of people are saying Jalen Waddle, but you know, we might have a chance at Devonta Smith. So listen, it is a supremely talented wide receiver class. So I wouldn't be mad at either way. I would try to get Galladay if it makes financial sense. If we can just sneak in, um, you know, with a reasonable contract. Obviously, you're gonna have to pay up a little bit. But if we go the during the draft, I would go offensive line. I would go with Slater, myself, and again, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, and they had all the weapons in the world, but it did not matter in the trenches. It did not matter once you saw that they were depleted and then the replacements weren't up to par. You see the result. You see the result of when you have subpar offensive lines, what it can happen. It doesn't matter how many weapons you have. You can have all the weapons in the world, but if you don't have protection, what is it good for to have all the weapons? And that's my mentality. I look at Dallas's great years. They had dominant offensive line. They were running the football. You look at our situation. This is the biggest season of Daniel Jones's career. So yes, we need to give him weapons, but we also need to be very mindful of, in order for him to get those weapons the ball, he needs time in the pocket. And we've seen Eli Manning have an up and down, inconsistent career because we never invested heavily into the offensive line. And so, in my opinion, Slater is rated the number one tackle according to Daniel Jeremiah, who is a pretty good analyst and expert. He's worked in front offices, as well as he hit on Mekhi Becton, from the New York Jets. He was his top rated tackle going into last season's draft, and he made the Pro Bowl. And so I would go offensive line, but again, if we go wide receiver, as long as we address offensive line and free agency and we get a reinforcement here, then I'm all good for it. If we don't get an offensive line, to me, it's a failure. You can't just go in with the current. You need to bring someone else in, especially after you just cut Kevin Zeichler, which you can make a case was our best offensive lineman. So those are my thoughts. I would go offensive line. Where would you go?
Well, I already mentioned I'd go wide receiver with Waddle, but I think when it comes to the offensive line, uh, there's going to be some cost effective guards out there that we can bring on. Because if we go tackle again, then that's saying we don't have much conviction in either Andrew Thomas or Matt Perth. And Andrew Thomas start to show a little bit of flashes towards the end of the season. I'm hoping that he's going to continue to get better and work throughout the offseason. And Pert as well, he showed some flashes in spurts when he was coming in to replace Cam Fleming for a few plays. Even he was replacing Andrew Thomas. We also are still going to have Nate Solder. He's also going to be somebody that we can rely on if something were to go wrong. So I don't know if I would go that high for tackle. I mean, if you want to go and use some of our later picks to fill out the offensive line, then I'd be with you on that one. But I think if we're gonna go with edge, I think wide receiver is definitely the best place to go. Or we could try to draft our number two quarterback. I mean cornerback, but I think with what I'm seeing from Waddle and his ability to create separation, the fact that he's a receiver that has a lot of speed, and the fact that Daniel Jones, I think when you see Daniel Jones, the fact that we bring in a legit number one like Waddle, we can move Sterling Shepard back to the slot more consistently. And I think when we had Golden Tate in, we kind of alternated with both Golden Tate outside and with Sterling Shepard outside. And I think now that we're going to have, or we are hoping to address number one, we can start putting Shepard back in a position where he's better fit. And I think just that in itself is going to help out Daniel Jones immensely.
Yeah, I'm going offensive line. I'm just going offensive line, man. I think we've seen Daniel Jones. I forgot what was his like Pro Football Focus grade.
His
I
PFF.
think it was like in the yeah, I think it was like in the high 90s when he had a certain, I think it was like 4 seconds or something like that. Or I think they framed it as clean pocket. We had a clean pocket. He had a very high grade, and so Slater is an excellent athlete. He has strong hand placement. He has quick feet. He's versatile. He can play inside or on the or at tackle, and he's extremely fast for an offensive lineman. And so he ran well at the 40, and he had 33 you know reps on the bench preps, and so he's a very strong. I mean, Zach Martin, I kind of see a little bit of Zach Martin in him. They both came in with kind of similar questions where Zach Martin, uh, you didn't know if he was going to be a tackle or a guard. He has short arms. Zach Martin came in at the combat at 32 and I think 7/8, and Slater's at 33 inches. And typically they want, offensive tackles to have, 35-inch arm length. And so, and they came in with the same questions. And Zach Martin, when he's played tackle, he's been outstanding. And we all know he's an all pro guard. So listen, I wouldn't mind where we go. I would go Slater. I would continue to strengthen that offensive line. You have Andrew Thomas at left tackle. You can put Slater in at right tackle, or even put him in at guard. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with Solder, because Solder now he could either be a swing tackle, which he can take in Cam Fleming's role. He can start at right tackle, which will means he will have to beat out Matt Pert in training camp, or you can move him to guard and use some of that height and size of Nate Solder, and move him inside since he's a little bit older now and he may not have the speed to play tackle. So we'll see what happens, man. This is it's gonna be a very fun off season, and it's probably one of the most important off seasons in recent Giants memory.
So you let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you agree with JD and believe that the Giants this free agency should target a wide receiver like Kenny Galladay, and then in the draft go offensive lineman? Or do you agree with me and think we should go edge in free agency and then target wide receiver in the draft? Let us know down in the comments. If you ever want to follow the channel, you can catch us at Sports Vibes TV, either on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And if you ever want to follow JD and see what he has going on, he has a bunch of other shows and platforms that he deals with and produces some great content. You can check him out on Twitter at JD Sports Market. Once again, this is the Giants Report. I'm your host, Keith, joined by my co host, JD, and we're out.